Hi everyone, Ravi this side. Welcome to Engineering Adda. Today in this video, we are going to discuss what is a response entity and when one should use the response entity as the return type of their API. So first of all, what is response entity is? Response entity is nothing but it is a tool provided by the Spring that help us in handling our HTTP response in a very concise, flexible, customized way. So let's say you are going to develop a REST API and you are trying to handle your response of that API, then the response entity will help you if you want to customize your response, if you want to add some extra field in your response, if you want to send some status code in your response. So those things, this response entity will help you. So that is what response entity is. It is a tool provided by the Spring to handle your response in very customizable, concise way. Now there are the scenarios that one should consider when they are going to use the response entity. Nowadays, people are normally using the response entity without knowing the exact scenario when one should use the response entity. So that is what we are going to discuss here. So let me try to go to the next slide to discuss about some scenarios here. So let's say we develop one API. These are the normal ways of API development. So let's say we are going to develop one API which is finding out the student details or student object based upon the ID that we are passing. So we develop this API get mapping, get student based upon the student ID. So we are passing this student ID as a path variable. We are using that student ID to find out the student from the DB and then return out that student. So that is what we are doing in the first API. So the return type of the first API is nothing but it's an entity which is a student. And this will work good. It will try to find out the student from the DB and then return it out. Here you should consider, you should see that the return type of this API is student, which is an entity. You can also create your own custom DTO class and use it as a return type. But here we are trying to return a entity here. Okay, so you can either return an entity or DTO, or the other approach is you can also use some generic ways to return your response of the API. Like the second one is we are returning the generic thing here. We are returning the map of string of object as a return type of this API, where we are doing the same thing. We are finding out the student from the TT. We are finding out the student from the DB, and we are not only returning that student. What we are doing is we are converting that student into the form of a map. So we are returning a map of string of object where we are trying to create a map with the key as student details and the value as student that we find out from the DB. So the map is a map of string which is student details, which is working as a key, and the value is student object that we find out from the DB. So this is another way of developing the API. So the first one is where you can use the entity or DTO as the return type. The second one is where you can use the generic approach, where you can create the list or a string or map to return your API response. Now these are the two normal ways of developing the APIs. Now go to the next slide to discuss about when we are going to use the response entity to return our API response. So let's say the same thing are here. What we are doing is we are trying to develop one API which is finding out the student from the DB and trying to return it. Okay, so what we are doing is in this case, the API is doing like if your API is looking same, like it is a get student and we are passing the ID as a path variable, but the return type of this API is not the same. We are not simply returning the student. We are not simply returning the map of string of object. What we are doing is we are returning the response entity of a student here. That means we are returning not simply a DTO or the entity that we created. We are returning the response entity of that object. Okay. So how we can use it out? So what we are doing is we are finding out the student. We are storing it in a student object, and then we are returning a response entity, and in the body of that response entity, we are appending that student object and then simply returning it out. It is working as same that we are doing in the first API. It will look like same. The response will look like same. That is what the first API is returning. But the difference is we are using response entity. We are appending body that we want to return in the body of the response entity and then simply returning it out. Now the second scenario is doing the same. We are returning the response entity of map of string of object. What we are doing is we are finding out the student based upon the ID. We are creating a map of student details, and we are using the value of student object as a value of this map. And then in the body of response entity, we are appending that map and then we are returning it out. So the return type here is response entity of map of string of object. Okay, but this is not the ideal case when one should use the response entity. If you are only returning the body, the response body, then you should not use the response entity. You can go with the normal approach of developing the API if you are only returning the body. But let me try to go there. But if you want to return some other fields like HTTP headers, like status code along with the body of the response entity, then you can go with the response entity way of returning your API. Okay, so let me try to go to the next slide to discuss when one should use response entity. One should always avoid using response entity if they are only returning the body. They should go with the normal return type. So when one should use response entity in the scenario when they are returning headers, some status code along with the body as the return type of that API. So you are not only you should not use response entity if you are only sending the body in the response entity. If you are sending some headers or some other fields along with the body, then you should go with this response entity approach of return type of a API. Okay, so this is clear. Now let me try to go to the next slide to discuss about more response entity. So what is response entity? Is a powerful tool provided by the Spring for handling HTTP responses in more flexible and customizable way. It allows you to control the entire HTTP response, including status code, headers, and body. Here are some common scenarios where you might want to use response entities. So let me try to go to the next slide to discuss about this scenario one by one. So the first scenario is custom HTTP status code. So when you need to return a specific status code that is different from the default one provided by the Spring, then you can go with this response entity return type. So let's say here we develop one API called resource, which is finding out the resource, and if the resource is null, it is returning a new response entity, and in the code what we are returning is we are returning HTTP status dot not found. And if it is not null, we are returning response entity along with the body, which is resource, and the status code as okay. So let's say this like resource is null, then usually it will fail, right? Usually it will return a empty null pointer exception or some empty thing. But if you want to append a status code so that the user or client can get a better understanding, then you should send the not found as a status code. And how you can send it out? You can send only with the help of response entity. If you are using the normal way of developing the API where you are simply returning the entity or DTO or general things, then you cannot send this status code. So when you are sending the status codes, you should use the response entity. Going to the next slide, when you want to send the custom headers, you should use the response entity. So here, let's say we are finding out the resource, and then we also want to send some headers or custom headers as a response of our API. Then we can use the response entity, where we can pass the resource as a body, header as a header, and status as a status. So like this is one of the way, like you can try to create a new response entity and then pass the body, header, and status. Or there are the separate methods available in the response entity that you can use, like dot body, and inside that body method you can pass the body, which is resource here. And then there are dot headers method, where you can pass the headers, and then there is a status code dot OK or dot not found. Those things you can also do. So this is another way of handling with the response entity. And this is another scenario where one should use the response entity when they are passing the custom headers. Going to the next slide, if the response is empty, then you can use response entity to handle it better way. And this is the scenario. Let's say you deleted out one resource, and if that resource is not found, then you can return the status as no content. Otherwise, you can return as not found. Okay. Going to the next slide, error handling. Let's say you have find out one resource from the DB, and if that is there inside the DB, you can return the resource along with the OK. If it is not there, if it is not found, you can return the status code as not found. And if it is some internal server error, you can return the status code as internal server error. So this is how you can also handle the errors with the help of response entity. Going to the next slide, this is the conditional responses, when you need to conditionally set different response type. So let's say you find out the resource, and if the resource is null, you want to create a error message for that, and then you want to send that error as a response, and status is not found. Then you can also do those things here. And if you want to, let's say you have some complex responses, then also you can use this response entity. So here what we are doing is we are finding out the resource. We are creating one map of a string of object. Inside that we are putting the data, and data as a resource, and then we are also, along with that, we are also adding some timestamp, and then we are returning the response entity of that response, and status is OK. But here you can consider that the return type of this API is response entity of map of string of object. Okay, so this is how you can use the response entity, and these are the scenario where one should use the response entity. Now let me try to bring out the benefit of using response entity. So benefit of using response entity. The first one is flexibility. It gives you full control over the STP response. Like you can add the headers, you can add the status code, or you can, according to the responses that you are getting, according to that, you can create your own response and then try to send it out. The second one is customizability. Easily set custom headers and status code. Third one is consistency. Ensure consistent response structure across the different endpoints. And then error handling. It helps clear and precise error responses with appropriate status code. So this is the benefit of using the response entity. And now going to the next slide. In summary, we can say that response entities should be used when you need to go beyond the default capabilities provided by the Spring MVC, such as custom status code, headers, or handling more complex response scenario. So this is about the response entity, and these are the scenario one should consider when they are going to use the response entity. So let me try to come out of it and go to the IntelliJ and create one Spring Boot application, and then we'll try to see practically how we can use the response entity. So let's say a response entity. Select the Maven here and go next. Just going to use the Lombok, web. And also if you want to include, you can include the Lombok here. And then just try to create it. And just wait for a few seconds, and once everything look good, then we can try creating our stuff here. Okay, so you can see it's resolving the dependency, it will take few seconds of time. Wait for that, and then we can start doing our development. So we are good. I think you can go to the source and go to this Java. Let me try to create one entity here. Let's say a student. And let's say student have a private ID. And let's say private string name, and then address, and also you can let it be like 3 only. So we have ID, name, and address of the student, and then we wanted all argument constructor, and then no argument constructor, then data. Okay, so we created this entity here, and now let me try to create one service class. So let's say student service. Okay, annotate this with @component, and we are good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a method, let's say a public, which is returning a student. Okay, and strings, its return type is student, and let's say string ID. And then what we are doing is we are trying to return new student. So you can, like, we are not going to use the database here, so we are simply trying to find out the student. Or what you can do is you can let me try to do that. Let me try to create a list of a student here. List of a student. Let's say list of a student. Equal to new array list, and then let me import this out. Okay, let me try to copy this. Let me import the array list, and we are good. Now inside this list, let me try to add couple of students. Okay, so let me put it here this way, which is returning a list of a student, and we are not going to pass anything here. We are creating one list of a student, and now I'm going to add the students here inside this list. So let's say the first one is ID is 1, and then name is, let's say, Raman, and let's say address is Delhi. Okay, so this is not, sorry, I'm doing something wrong. New student, and we are good. Now just copy paste these things, and let me try to add a couple more student here. So just paste it out and edit. So let's say student second, and then third, let's say name is Ram, and here it is, let's say Dhanush, and let's say they are all from the Delhi. Okay, now let me try to add this, let me try to return this list here from this method. Okay, so this method is nothing, this method is doing nothing. It is trying to return the list of a student, and inside that we have 3 students. Now let me try to create another method which is going to return only one student. Okay, so based upon the ID. So ID we are passing, let's say ID, and then what we are doing is we are calling this public method inside this, and we have the list of student. Yeah, we try to create one list of student object here, and it is like we are going to call this student method. Okay, copy this, and now we have the list, and with this list we are going to find out the student with the help of the ID that we are passing. So how we can do that? Let me try to use the stream here. So we have the list. I'm going to use the stream to let's say I'm converting this list into the stream, and then we are going to use the filter, and with the help of filter what we are doing is we are finding out the student with the help of the ID that we are passing. So we are like trying to get out the ID, and then if this ID is equal to the ID that we are passing as an argument, then we'll find out that particular student here, and then let's say we are going to find first and then get it out. Okay, so we are good. So let me try to tell you again what we are doing. We have the student list, and then we are converting it into the stream, and then with the help of Java 8 codes we are finding out the student with the help of like the ID that it is matching. So we are taking out the ID of the student one by one. We are matching it with the ID that we are passing here, and whatever is matched we are finding it out and then returning it. Let me try to store it in the student object. So let's say student st equal to this, and then simply return that st. So we are good, and now what we are going to do is we are going to create a controller here. So let's say student controller, and we are good. Let me annotate this with @rest controller, and now we are going to create a get mapping which is saying, let's say get student, and then we pass the ID as a path variable, and then public string a student, and get student, and then we are passing this ID as a path variable. Okay, let's say string ID, and then what we are doing is we are calling the service method here. So for that, let me auto-wire the service here. So let's say private student service, and with the help of student service dot get student, we are passing the ID here, and then simply return it out. Now we are good. Now let me try to run this application in whole. So after that, what we can do is we can hit this API, and then if it is working fine, we'll also go with the use case of the response entity. Okay, so here what I did is I developed only one API and to see how it is working, and then we can go with the use case of the response entity. Okay, or when one should use the response entities. So you can see our API is like our application is up on the port number 8080. Now we can go and hit this API. So I'm just going to hit it out. So let's say get student, and then finding out the student, let's say 1. I'm not sure we can pass it out like this. Yeah, let me try to hit it. So you can see in the response we are getting the first student, the student with the ID 1, which is Raman, and he is from Delhi. So the API is working fine, and this is one of the way to develop the API. Now what we are going to do is we are going to use the response entity here. So copy this piece of code, paste it out here. Again, let me try to change the return type. So this time the return type would be response entity and of student type. Okay, and what we are going to do is we are simply going to find out the student. So let's say student st equal to this, and remove this from here. Now what we can do is we can return the response entity, and in the body, what we can do is like you can do something like that, student response entity dot okay, and in the body you can pass this st. Okay, and what it is, okay, student, let's say 1, we are good. Again, let me try to run this piece of code and then try to see. So okay, we are getting some error here. Okay, so the same API is there. That is why it is not able to find which one to hit out. So let me try to change this API a little bit. So again, let me try to run this again and then see. So wait for a few seconds. It is up, and it is up on the port number 8080. Go to this terminal and try to find out the API student detail here. So I'm passing this student 1 and then just hit it out. You can see in the response we are getting the same thing that we received for the previous API, where we are simply returning a student. We are getting the same thing, and here in the response entity we are only adding the body, and then we are getting the same thing here. So that is what I was just wanted to say, that when you are only returning the body along with the response entity, then go with the normal approach. Otherwise, if you want to add some extra fields like status or headers, then you can use the response entity in your API response. So now let me try to show you how you can use the headers and all those things. So I'm just going to create the HTTP headers here and going to add some custom header. Let's say custom header, and inside that, let's say it is ABC, value is ABC. And what we are doing is along with this body, we also want to, let's say, set the status code. Not sure how we can do that. HTTP status. Yeah, HTTP status dot okay. Let me import this. Okay, it is not this. We'll see. So what we are going to do is we are going to pass like we can also use response entity, and then with the help of this methods like okay or body, you can pass those things. So here you can see we have the body okay method which accept the body, and then we have a bad request, created, internal, not found, status, all those things are there, right? So let me try to use this let's say status, and status is HTTP okay, and then we are going to add some extra things like body. You can add the body here. Before that, let me add the headers here. So headers, we are passing the headers that we created, and then I'm just going to add the body here. In the body, I'm just going to pass the string that we fetched out from the DB, you can say, or from the list that we created, and then simply build it here. And I'm not sure why it is saying something else. Okay, so simply this is what we are doing. So what we are doing is we are using response entity. We are setting out the status. We are trying to append our headers, and then we are appending the body. Now, if you'll go to this previous response, you will find that we are only getting this HTTP. In the headers, we like status code is 200, which is good. In the headers, we have content type, transfer encoding, and date. But now we are adding some extra custom headers, which is its name is custom header and its value is ABC. That you are also going to see here. And in the body, you are getting these things which you are going to receive for this as well. So now let me try to rerun this application again and try to hit out the API. So just wait. Yeah, it is up. Now go there and try to hit it out again. So I'm finding out this student with the ID 1, and we are getting it out. So in the response, you can see that the status is 200, and if you go to the headers, you can see that the custom header that we added, we are getting, and in the body, we are getting the response body, and then everything look good. So this is how you can use the response entity, right? if you want to pass the status, or if you want to pass the headers, with the headers you want to pass some custom headers, then you can use this response entity. There are so many fields that are there. With the help in the response entity, you can go and explore it out. And those scenarios that we discussed, like when one should use, you can create those scenarios and try to use this custom, try to use this response entity and then try to pass it out. So you can go through those things, and then from your side you can try to use it. Now here you can see we are using this response entity.status and all those things, but another way is also something like return new response entity, and inside that bracket you can pass the body, headers and the status. So let me try to use that as well and then see how it is working. So let's say we are returning the body as st, and then headers we have, and then status is okay. Now again rerun this application and try to hit the API again and then see. So we are good, and just hit it out. Again we are seeing in the response, you can see that we are getting the body, and in the headers we have the custom headers, and the status is 200. So this is how you can use a response entity, and these are the scenarios where you can use the response entity as a return type of your API. Okay, so this is about the video, guys. If you like the video, please hit the like button and please subscribe the channel for more such content. Thanks.